Good morning, everyone. We thank you for joining us this morning for worship. And we are here to celebrate this morning. We thank you for, as some of you are still coming on, some of you may be still making breakfast or getting yourself together. Gather the family on the couch or wherever you are in the kitchen. And let's spend a time of worship. We're going to celebrate the greatness of our God this morning. We're going to lift him up because he's worthy to be praised. And we want you to join us. I'm going to ask the team to come on up at this time as we're going to worship. And we're going to worship the true and living God this morning because he's worthy to be praised. Let's lift these songs of worship to him this morning. So that wherever you are joining us, that you will put your hands together. And we're going to lift every praise to our God this morning. If you believe that today, I pray you'll sing it from your heart and sing it with understanding. Every praise to our God. Every word. injustice, with the virus of COVID-19 and everything that's happening in our world, injustice, God. Help us as your people to stand firm, not only in the fight against all of these things, but so much more in the fight against the kingdom of darkness. Sin has taken the lives of so many more people than COVID-19 has ever done. And God, I pray that as a generation will rise up and be counted as people that would be standing the gap for our nations, for our communities, for our countries, and for this world. As we are lifting these songs before you, we lift them from our hearts. And God, our hearts are broken before you, but we know that we need each other. And as we go through this life, things may not all become easy, but the burden can be a little bit lighter when we have each other. And we thank you for all the reminders in these songs this morning as we lift them to you. In Jesus' name. This song is our kind of our anthem here at your practice whenever we have our greeting time. And we can probably get into just singing it because we know it, but the words are so powerful. I need you. You need me. We're all a part of God's body. And there's an next part that says, I pray for you. You pray for me. And if there's ever a time that we need each other, it's now. And so, as we lift this song or greeting song, you at home, you can high five your children or your husband. You can give a few hugs if you feel comfortable doing that. All right, take it away, team, as we sing our greeting song this morning. I hope you with your family members as we sing this song.
We're all
bag in our hand, with some food, with some meat. Jesus provides for us in our way. I have the privilege of being the one to share the word this morning. And I don't want to give away too much, but to be known as a friend of God is such a beautiful thing. Especially in light of the reality that we were once his enemies. And from birth we were destined to be separated from him. And I'm eager to share what the Lord has laid on my heart this morning. I pray you will be as excited as you were for the worship about the word this morning. I believe God wants to say something to us that will challenge all of us as we go through this time. And we're here to declare that I am a friend of God and he calls me friend. Take it away too much. And verse 15 says, henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard of my Father, I have made known unto you. And in James 2 and verse 20 it says, and the scripture was fulfilled which said, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. And he was called friend of God. We declare this morning that we are friends of God as we sing together this morning. Who am I? You are mindful of me, that you hear me when I go. Father, we worship you this morning. You are worthy to be praised, Lord. Thank you for your goodness towards us, Lord. Your loving kindness, your mercies are in each day. We humble ourselves before you in this moment as we have just finished declaring that I am a friend of God, and you call me friend. We celebrate this friendship and this newfound hope that we have in you. Thank you for all these songs of celebration this morning. Remind us of this hope we have in you. As we open your scriptures, will you speak to us? Give us a fresh word. A word that will heal broken hearts. A word that will strengthen those that are wounded. A word that will give hope to the hopeless this morning. We love you and we thank you for who you are. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I'm so humbled to be able to bring a word to you this morning. But before I jump into the message, I want to demonstrate a bit of an activity that I believe will help in solidifying the direction of this message is going to go this morning. Because this message is a message of friendship, the great friendship that was shared between David and Jonathan. And I want to use this activity. Some of you may be aware of it. It's called a trust fall. And I'm going to ask my sister Daniel, I kind of volunteered her to be the candidate that's going to be doing the falling. And all of us as a team, we're gonna be catching her this morning. I know some of you at home may worried for her, but don't try it at home. We're gonna demonstrate it. All right. So I'm gonna need some help. Pastor Evans, would you bring that box there for us up here? Gonna need some help. Karen, gonna need your help. But with this activity, as I said, it's an activity of trust. So I'm going to be having my dear sister Daniel step up on this box. Come on, let me help you. Hold the box for me. Step. Now, she's aware of this activity. And as I said, it's an activity of trust. And we're going to be positioning ourselves to catch her. And so interestingly, in a lot of relationships, when a lot of people find someone that they love, they call it falling in love. And a lot of times some people fall in love, but the person doesn't catch them. Now, I'm going to show you a clip of something that we don't want Daniel to do this morning, because we want to ensure that she gets the instruction properly. So when I tell her, she's going to fold her arms and she's going to close her eyes and she's going to fall backward. Watch this video to see why I'm very specific with the instructions.
Size and building trust between one another. So Harrison, if you don't mind going first, step up here on this chair and close your eyes. All right, and then everybody fill in, and we're going to ask you to fall, and then they will catch you. So you have to trust us. So I'm going to count to 3. Just relax and fall. Okay? 1, 2, 3. No, wait, no!
We have the team here providing support for that. I'm sure there is a big word up there. So she remembers the activity. She has done it before. So then I'm going to ask you to bring your arms across and close your eyes. And on 3, I'm going to ask you to fall. We'll be here to secure you. You have to trust us. All right? It's called a trust fall. So after 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Daniel. Thanks, step down. I pray that you want to give yourself a round of applause, team. Thanks so much. Pray that you want to clap as well. And but yeah, I have to say rest in peace to that guy that fell forward, and all of his face was probably damaged. Thanks so much, Sister Daniel, for being a good sport. That activity is really a demonstration of some of the things that should be very prominent in any form of healthy relationship or friendship. There should be trust, there should be support. Where even though Daniel was falling, and though she may have been a bit scared, there was the support that was present for when she fell. But we can admit that a lot of times when life gets hard and situations get troublesome for us, the places that you would think you would be able to find the support and the strength is not usually there. And it's really sad to say that. And dysfunctionality isn't really anything new. Because if you look just in the first chapters of the Bible, you will see that Cain murdered his brother Abel over having a better sacrifice. Jacob tricked Esau with some stew peas for his birthright. Joseph's brother, basically we say bad mind in Jamaica, but it's envy or covetousness him for and wanted to kill him. But Joseph, as we know, the pretty famous words were penned towards the end of Genesis, that you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So although they wanted to kill him, and one brother said, all right, let's sell him into slavery instead, God was working his purpose out in the life of Joseph. David too was part of a dysfunctional family. In an unwinnable battle, he rose up as a young man, the champion of God, as the man that would stand in the gap. But instead of supporting and celebrating him, his brothers questioned his intent. And we're basically wondering, where is this little shepherd boy going? Don't they have the sheep to go back home and to take care of? Jonathan, another important character in our time, in our study this morning, was also a part of a dysfunctional family. As a man of faith, fighting alongside his father, King Saul at the time, he had front row seats watching his father move from a man of God, of great faith as a king, and falling into becoming a disobedient and rebellious king before God. Today we want to take a look at the very unlikely friendship that was formed between David and Jonathan, as we examine for our topic, if you want to write this down, brother from another mother. Brother from another mother. And for those that are a lot more trendy and you want something that can be hashtagable, it's BFAM, B-F-A-M, brother from another mother. So, as we jump in this morning, would you pray with me? Father, we thank you for these songs, great reminders of just who you are and that we are friends of you. We are no longer your enemies. Thank you, dear God, that we get to examine your word. Will your people be excited as we spend some time studying the life, the friendship of David and Jonathan. Speak to us, dear God, by your word, and help us all to leave here encouraged. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So in 1 Samuel 14 is the first, well not the first, we meet him in chapter 13, but verse 14, chapter 14 rather of 1 Samuel, we meet Jonathan. Understand that Jonathan was a prince. He grew up in a good household, as it were, trained to be a warrior and specifically an archer. And he was the rightful heir to the throne, as he was the eldest son of King Saul, who was king at the time. And I know a lot of times Jonathan is only remembered for aiding David and being his friend, but Jonathan on his own was a very dangerous man. And most importantly, Jonathan was a man of faith. He and his armor bearer, as I'm gonna show you, took on 20 Philistines on their own and defeated all of them. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 14. We're gonna hang out between 1 Samuel 14 and about 1 Samuel 14 and about 28. Just gonna pick some lessons out of the friendship of both of them. Let's look at verse 1 first. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young man that bare his armor, come and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he told not his father. So Jonathan kind of snuck out, because the Israelites were in a bit of a predicament, because they were facing off against the Philistines. And Saul, in an act of disobedience, he went and offered a sacrifice. He made a sacrifice, and it wasn't pleasing before God. So basically God had withdrawn his support from him in that moment. And God was basically saying to him that I'm going to replace you as king. But that would not happen until about chapter 16 of 1 Samuel. But look at verse 14. It says, and that first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within, as it were, an half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. And in verse 16, and the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. So Jonathan, in the slaying of those 20 men, kind of set off a chain reaction, and a whole garrison of Philistines were defeated. So that was Jonathan. Just a little synopsis of who Jonathan was. Jonathan was a warrior. He was a man of faith, and he, on his own, devoid of David, was a dangerous man of God. But who was David? We know a lot about David. We know that God had placed a mark on David's life for him to become king. We know the story of how Samuel went down to anoint this new king and examine all of his 7 other brothers. But David was out taking care of the sheep and getting to know his God a lot better. Him being marked by God to become the next king of Israel didn't mean, though, that he was no longer taking care of sheep. Because even after he kills Goliath by chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, David would still leave the palace where Saul was and go back to his father, take care of sheep, and then go back and forth. So he was still doing what he usually do. Sometimes we allow the blessings and the favor of God to get to our heads. Because although David was set up to be the next king of Israel, he was still serving in his place of humility as that young shepherd boy. And we know a lot of the lessons that David learned, because it was while he was shepherd boy, he learned how to slay that bear and to slay that lion, and then he was able to slay Goliath. So now that we kind of got a glimpse into who David and Jonathan are, I want us to look at a few lessons that we can find in the friendship that these two very unlikely friends share. Remember, one a prince and a warrior, and one just a lowly shepherd boy that was fresh off slaughtering Goliath in the battle of the Philistines. So the first lesson I want us to look at as we turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18 is Jonathan's love and humility. Jonathan's love and humility. Look at the first few verses in chapter 18. It says, and it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul, verse 2, took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Verse 3. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. Verse 4. And Jonathan stripped of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. You know, in life there are some people that you meet and it feels as if you have known them your entire life. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but sometimes you just come across some people on this journey of life and then you spark up a conversation and you have so many similarities even in your personalities and you just kind of mesh. And that was a similar situation that was happening here with David and Jonathan. By the time David officially meets Jonathan, he was still really young. David was about, researchers say, about 18, going up to 20. And Jonathan was already a bit older, they say in his upper 30s, going to his 40s. And the thing about Jonathan's humility and his love for David is demonstrated so clearly in verse 4, that Jonathan was so secure in himself that he basically submitted himself to this young man called David. Him taking his robe and his armor and even giving his bow was an act of submission and surrender to this young man that was eventually going to become the new king of Israel. It's so beautiful also to see the similarities of how Christ laid aside so much of himself. Skip over to Philippians chapter 2 and verses 5 to 7. It says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. And this is the powerful verse. But made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of man. And that is basically the picture that was happening right here with Jonathan, because Jonathan was basically saying, I am giving of this as an act of service to you, as your servant, acknowledging that you have been ordained and anointed by God, and I am going to have to serve beneath you. And that is such a beautiful picture. So that's Jonathan's love and humility. But another lesson that we can learn is David's favor and troubles. Because the two things, favor and troubles, they kind of go hand in hand. Because when God marks you as somebody of purpose, I want to tell you that the enemy doesn't like that. And he has a way of setting all sorts of traps and snares to try and defeat that purpose that God had placed in your life to be birthed. And a lot of us don't really, I don't think a lot of us grasp the reality that being marked by God does not mean that you're exempt from trouble. Because in this life, you will have trouble. It's not a matter of if you're going to have trouble. It's when you're going to have trouble. And this becomes so much more apparent in David's life, because David had favor among the people. And I want to tell you, especially the ladies, because we're going to look at a few verses, and the Bible actually describes David as a very handsome, good-looking young man. And I want to tell you, to my young single brothers out there, you see, when you're focused on loving God and serving Him, the ladies will come. The ladies will come. And my single sisters that are out there, you see, when you're focused on serving God and walking in purpose, the young men will come. Alright? So you just stay in purpose and don't lose that anointing that God has placed on your life, and keep walking in His favor. But I want us to see, I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to see what is happening here in the passage. Chapter 18 and verse 5 is where we are now. It says, and David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servant. Verse 6. And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the woman came out of, watch this, not just some of the citizens, all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy. But we all know that they didn't really come out to see Saul. We know they came out to see David. Come on, they came out to see David, because you're going to see it in the next verse. That when the woman answered one another, so they basically shouting in chorus. You know, we do certain songs and we say, eh, and somebody would say, eh. So that is what was happening here. That's it. And the woman answered one another as they played and said, Saul had slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. No, I know Pastor Mike Todd, one of my favorite preachers. He had a little dance, and I won't try to reenact it. So I'll say 10,000. So that's I just picture that anytime I read this passage of scripture, because you can just imagine how Saul's blood was boiling for David. Because look down at what happened in verse 8 now. Because Saul hear all of this excitement going on for David, and people highlighting how he only killed 1,000 and David killed 10,000, and Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands, and what can he have more but the kingdom? Verse 9. And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. I mean, I said it earlier that Saul was basically the epitome of what we call in Jamaica bad mind or envy or covetousness, because it's like it was already bad that David was going to replace Saul as king. But here was David bringing in more accolades, as it were, than the king of Israel at the time. Beyond that, the heart of Saul came out so clearly of how insecure he was and how afraid he was of David. Because beyond this time, there were at least 3 separate times throughout the passage where Saul deliberately tried to murder David. And we're going to look at a few of them. 2 directly, and one of them he tried to send others to do it. All of which, of course, failed. Because when the favor of God is upon your life, nothing can stop it. And I want to remind somebody this morning that you may be going through a difficult time. And I believe that God has marked you for something great. And I want you to listen. God has marked you for something powerful. And although a lot of things in your life may be happening right now, and it seems as if that purpose that God has called you for may not be birthed, things are looking rough for you. But keep on walking, keep on keeping on, as they say. Keep on trying, keep on moving. Because I believe that God is going to work everything out. We continue to look at some of David's troubles. We're looking at the second lesson of David's favor and his troubles. Skip down to verse 10 and look at what verse 10 says. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the host. And David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hands. Listen carefully. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall. And David avoided out of his presence, not once, twice. Verse 12. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. Next verse. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. Verse 14. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Because it was just continuously showing out the heart that Saul had towards David. He was really, really threatened by him. And this incident marked the beginning of the schemes of Saul against David. Tried to throw his javelin at David to pin him against the wall, to kill him. And I wanted to remember that phrase, the javelin. I wanted to remember it because it seems the javelin was Saul's favorite weapon, his weapon of choice. Because he would eventually give David one of his daughters to marry. And again with his scheme, Saul said, I don't want any dowry. And dowry is basically a gift that the groom would give to the father-in-law when he going to marry a daughter. I don't want any dowry from you, David. I remember he appointed David as captain over 1,000. What Saul did, he was trying to send David out into battle in order to get David to be killed on the front lines. It sounds very similar, Pastor Evan. It sounds very similar to something that David would later employ in his life when he wanted to secure Bathsheba for himself as a way to cover his sin. Yeah. Remember, he sent Uriah in the front lines of the battle, the hottest part of the battle. You remember? All right. So that is exactly what Saul was doing here. He wanted to send David to the front lines. And not only that, but this is a very specific instruction that he gave David. He said, instead of a dowry, I want you to get 100 foreskins of these men. Now, it's one thing to kill 100 men. It's another thing to go through and circumcise 100 men. And we know the process of circumcision, the cutting of the foreskin of the penis and yada yada yada, all of that stuff. Saul had another idea. I remember the verse towards the end of Genesis. It says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Because this is what David did. David was happy about the request from Saul. So much so that David went and slaughtered not only 100, but 200 Philistines and carried all of the foreskins and came and gave them to Saul. And man, I tell you, that was something for Saul to see. Because down in verse 28, look at verse 28. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. 29. And Saul was yet more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Verse 30. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that in his name was much set by. So David was just a young man that was, he was just a cut above the rest. I remember the three Hebrew boys, Daniel and the three Hebrew boys, and how they behaved themselves in such a way that, you know, it was just so beautiful to see these young men deciding that they were going to take a stand and be separate, even in the midst of difficulties. So something I wanted to understand this morning as a lesson. Understand that being called by God and being a friend of God does not mean that you are not going to have problems and that you're not going to have troubles and struggles. Because here was David, the man that was called to be the next king of Israel. And he was going through some serious hardship at the hand of the new king. You would think that Saul would take David under his wings and, you know, teach David the ropes of what it means to be a king and all of that stuff. But that was not the case. Saul was so insecure in his position and in the reality that he had done so many ridiculous things in his time as a king that God was no longer with him and he was going to be replaced by this young man. So we looked at the first lesson, Jonathan's love and humility. We looked at the second lesson, which was David's favor and his troubles. Now, we're going to look at this very, very important lesson for this message. If you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember this lesson from this message. Is Jonathan's support and sacrifice. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 19. In verse 1, it says, And Saul spake to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should do what to David? That they should kill David. Verse 2. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. Verse 3. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, and I will tell thee. Verse 4. And Jonathan spake good of David unto his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee ward very good. If anything at all, David's death would have benefited Jonathan, if you really think about it. Because remember, Jonathan was the rightful heir to the throne as the eldest son of Saul. And David being eliminated from the picture would mean that the throne would fall to Jonathan. But the friendship Jonathan had with David wasn't one that was opportunistic. How far friendships today have gone where it's about what you can get from a relationship, what you can get from a friendship. It's about how does this friendship serve me? And for a lot of you may know what I'm talking about. A lot of your friends, they don't text you or they don't call you until they need something from you. It's all about what they can get. It's that draining. It's like that parasitic kind of mentality that a lot of people have. It's about what I can get. How can I benefit from this relationship, from this partnership? But that was not the kind of relationship that Jonathan had with David. Pastor Dave, I always hear him mention, we should give our needs met. And it sounds strange, but when I really think about it, it's about you as one person. Think about it. You as one person in that relationship or that friendship, and you are saying, how can I serve you? How can I make your life better? And I'm giving of myself to you. And picture that next person doing the same thing. And now it's you giving to that person to meet their needs, and that person giving to you, and it's giving your needs met. So that reality of just overlapping. So that was the kind of relationship that Jonathan had, that kind of love. Jonathan was able to see that David wasn't really all that impressive. He was able to see that David struggled too. But the thing with genuine friendship, it sees all the ugly and it stays. How often people become so afraid to be themselves in relationships because of a fear that people will run away. How often people know of their own scars and ways that they have been hurt emotionally, physically, mentally. And they are so afraid to open up and share with other people because they are afraid that people will take that hurt, and when the going gets tough further down in life, they use those same things against them. Yeah. So it's really a sad thing when, as believers, people cannot really depend on us as people that are of integrity, and they can come to us and be able to open up about what's going on in their life and be honest and know that level of confidentiality would be secure. Jonathan put his own life and reputation on the line to protect David from his father. After Jonathan spoke up for David and before his father promised Jonathan that he wouldn't trouble David again. But we know where the heart of Saul was by this time throughout the story. Because look at what happens in verses 9 and 10. So the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, and as he sat in his house with his javelin, I told you to remember the javelin, and David played with his hands. Because remember, David was visiting Saul. Whenever that spirit would trouble him, David would come along with his harp and he'd play some sweet, soothing music. So David is a very cool guy. He's a warrior, he's handsome, and he can play music as well. So, ladies, you know, what's more to ask for, you know? Look, verse 10. And Saul sought to smite David, even to the wall, with the what? Javelin. The javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. And a little bit after that situation happened, I think one of the funniest parts of this whole encounter, to me at least, it is very funny. Guys, read the Bible. Read the Bible. Like if you just spend the time to read some of these accounts from the Old Testament, man, you'll laugh. Listen to this. After that incident with David and Saul, David fled and went to his home because he was now married to Saul's daughter, Michal. But Michal, his wife, warned him and said, David, they're going to come here for you and they're going to kill you. So this is what his wife did. And a lot of times we see this kind of stuff in movies. You know. When somebody is coming to get somebody to hunt them, this is what David's wife did. His wife basically got a picture and placed the picture under the sheet and put some goat hair under the sheet and cover it to make it seem as if guys, this is the Bible, you know, this is no action movie. This is the Bible. And Michal hid that goat hair under there and put the picture there. And when the men came, they realized that it wasn't David and it was just a picture and with some goat hair here. And I just found that really funny. And after that attempt failed, and David ran away, of course, because his wife let him down a window, which sounds very similar to another story in the Bible of Rahab, the prostitute, that let down the spies that were spying out the land through a window. So David was let down through the window by his wife. And after that attempt failed, Saul didn't let up. Saul went again and found out where David was, and he sent 3 separate waves of men to kill David where he was. And something very, very significant happened, because every single wave that Saul sent, each time that they went down to where they heard David was, those men started to prophesy. They started to praise the Lord. They started to preach and to give great tidings, because Samuel the prophet was there with the other prophets. So you can imagine that God's presence was in that place. And God's protection was also in that place for David. So although Saul had his vision to hurt David, to harm David, the support and the protection of God was on his side. And so each time that he sent men, they started to prophesy. And then Saul himself went. So he sent 3 separate waves of men. And then he himself, the king of Israel, went down into that city. And then he himself started to prophesy. So God's protection was so much on the life of David. Before I move on to the last lesson this morning, we looked at the love and humility of Jonathan. We looked at the favor and the problems of David. And we also looked at the support and sacrifice of Jonathan. But before we move on to the last lesson, I wanted to note that Jonathan's sacrificial love for David came at a cost. It came at a cost. Saul made most of his attempts at David's life without Jonathan knowing. So although Jonathan knew that Saul was trying to kill David, he didn't know the lengths at which his father went in an effort to kill his best friend. Saul made most of his attempts at David's life without Jonathan knowing. So one night David opened up to Jonathan about all that was happening with his father. And Jonathan struggled to believe. 1 Samuel 20 and verse 1. You see Jonathan's response. 20 verse 1. And David fled from Naioth and in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life?" Verse 2. And he said unto him, "God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, and that he will show it to me. And why should my father hide this thing from me?" It is not so. Because Jonathan was so trusting of his father, although he saw that Saul really didn't like David. But he would never expect some of the things that Saul, his father, was willing to do to take the life of David. So David and Jonathan devised a plan to figure out what was really going on. And after Jonathan executed the plan, this is what happened. Look at verse 30 of chapter 20. It says, then, so this was on the back end of Jonathan basically questioning his father's motives and why he was after David. And it says, then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. Can you see what's happening here? Saul was so consumed with anger and wrath for David that Saul rather was ready and willing to take that anger out on his own son. What a thing that is when we get so consumed with anger that we just start to explode on everybody around us. And we, with our own hurt, we just start bleeding all over everybody that's around us. And people most times that have absolutely nothing to do with what we're going through.
Yeah, true.
And that is exactly what happened with Saul and his poor son Jonathan. What happened? Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, "Thou son, thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse," which was David, "to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness?" Skip to verse 31. "For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die." 32. "And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done?" 33. And Saul, you remember the javelin?
Yeah.
And Saul cast a javelin, this time not at David, at his own son. And whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. And look at how Jonathan's heart was broken in verse 34. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. Man, how sometimes our anger and our own selfish pursuits cost us so often some great relationships. Yes. Relationships between parents and children, between brothers and sisters, and I won't really go into details, but I remember an encounter I had with one of my brothers, and that's something that I will forever remember. I have seen firsthand what anger untamed can do to relationships. And that is exactly what happened between the relationship of Saul and his son. Jonathan was heartbroken. And he saw his father's true intention. So he met up with David for what would be one final time. So we looked at Jonathan's love and humility this morning. We looked at David's favor and his struggle. We looked at the sacrifice of Jonathan and the support of Jonathan. But lastly, we're going to look at what may seem to be the final goodbye of these two great friends. So we're going to look at David and Jonathan's farewell. Look at verse 41. So Jonathan, after seeing what had happened with his father, he devised a plan. He brought out one of his young men. It doesn't say if it was his armor bearer this time. But they went out, and Jonathan would shoot an arrow and send the young man to go and fetch it, to give him an opportunity to speak with David. And 41, as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place. And I'm going to have a picture so you can kind of see, just kind of graphic, an idea of how this may have looked. David arose out of a place toward the south and fell on his face to the ground and bowed himself 3 times, and they kissed one another and wept with one another until David exceeded. And I don't want you to get distracted by what we see happening there, because it says they kissed one another. Bear in mind that these were 2 men that were married and had wives and would soon raise children. So some people, you try to use this as an argument to support homosexuality, but that was not the case. The love that was shared between David and Jonathan was that kind of brotherly love, that friendship love, that it doesn't matter if David was having a good day or Jonathan was having a good day. They just loved and cared for each other. You could see that there was a kind of heaviness in the greeting that was happening between David and Jonathan. I don't know about you, but I have experienced what it feels like to go through a broken relationship and sometimes even a broken friendship, where different circumstances, sometimes out of your control, causes you and that person to basically have to go separate ways. And it's a heart-wrenching feeling, especially if you know that you have devoted so much time, so much energy, so much love, so much support to that person. And it feels as if after being so, because remember when we met David and Jonathan, it says that their souls were knit together. And it's like a ripping apart. Have you ever put the 2 sticky sides of tape together and then try to rip it apart? You notice that pieces of each side of the tape kind of rip into each other. And I feel, I try to put myself in that position, and I even got a little emotional thinking about it, because this was 2 great friends who were growing together and supporting each other, and they were basically about to be ripped from each other. And Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for as much as we have sworn, both of us in the name of the Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So that basically began the life of David as a refugee. Because although Jonathan expressed his anger towards his father, Saul did not stop. He continued to send conquests, running after David to try and kill David. And we know the story. David had an opportunity to kill Saul. Because there was this time in this cave that basically they were taking a rest, as it were. And David basically snuck up and cut off a piece of the tail of his robe. Just to prove to him that I could have killed him if I wanted. But David, being a wise young man, he knew that the call of God was still upon Saul's life. And if he had stepped in and had done that, he would have put himself in trouble with God. So the life of David as a refugee began. Skip over to chapter 23 of 1 Samuel. Look at verses 16 to 18. There was a time when the battle was really becoming overwhelming for David. The constant running and hiding. And then Saul promised him that he's not going to chase him anymore. And then Saul decided that he's going to chase. I wonder if Saul has schizophrenia. Or is it bipolar disorder or something? Because there will be moments when Saul would say, all right, David, I see that the hand of God is upon your life and I'm not going to chase you anymore. And then like 5 minutes after that, that's Saul behind David with armies trying to murder him again. And you wonder, this man was a madman. 23 and verse 16. So David was kind of overwhelmed. He was kind of struggling a little, a bit depressed. And Jonathan, Saul's son, we see Jonathan come up again, arose and went to David into the wood and strengthened his hand in God. That's such a beautiful picture. Verse 17. And he said unto him, fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel. And this was something that Jonathan declared. He said, and I shall be unto thee, and I shall be next unto thee, rather. And that also Saul my father know it. So basically, Jonathan was saying to David, you are definitely going to be the king of Israel, and I am going to be your second in command. So you see, Jonathan's humility comes into play yet again, because these were sometime in the future, as David was still running away from Saul, and Jonathan would have advanced in age a bit, and this was still an older guy that was the rightful heir to the throne. And he was humbling himself to this young man and saying that I am going to be your second. So Saul fell deeper into his madness. He became so consumed by his pursuit to kill David that he allowed his connection with God to deteriorate so badly. So much so that there was a battle to be fought by the Israelites against the Philistines. And he prayed to God, and God did not answer him. God didn't answer him. In verse 6 of, Pastor Mark, could you pull up verse 6 of chapter 28? And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. After that didn't work, Saul basically went to an other man. Well, other woman in this case. It was a lady. Or a sorcerer. Whichever term you'd want to place. And he basically was trying to use this. He disguised himself. And, sneaking again. But his actions only made things worse. In a battle that would follow, the Philistines would attack the Israelites a few days after. And Jonathan, his son, and his other two sons would be killed in battle. And when I read this, I felt it because I was immersing myself so much so into the life of these two young men that it was more than just reading some information on the page. Their lives became so real to me because I imagine having a friend that would love and care for me so much that he'd be willing to stand up to his father. Even if his father was set out to kill me, he would be willing to stand in between his father and me as an act of sacrifice and of love. And that is exactly what Jonathan was doing for most of his life. And Jonathan on the front lines of battle, as a result of the selfishness and the rebelliousness of his own father, he lost his own life. And I think too of also many times we allow our own selfish pursuits in this life to consume us to the point where we allow it to destroy relationships around us. And I'm telling you, if you are somebody that the only way that you can feel strong and you can feel mighty is by stepping on other people, I'm telling you that you're going to reap a just reward. You're going to reap a just reward. And so, not only did Jonathan and his brothers fall in that battle, Saul himself was mortally wounded. And I don't know if it was an act of pride or him just, thinking that I'm not going to die at the hand of any Philistines. He basically told the young man that was responsible for carrying his armor that I want you to kill me. I would rather die at the hand of somebody of my own tribe than the hand of any Philistine. But the young man was so afraid. And he said, "We're not doing it. Not doing that, King Saul." And Saul fell upon his own sword in an act of suicide. And when his armor bearer, in verse 5, saw that Saul was dead, the armor bearer was so loyal to Saul that he killed himself too. Such a tragic end to such a beautiful life. It's really heartbreaking when I think about how really heartbreaking when I think about it. But look at verse 31, because remember this is 1 Samuel 31 rather. This is about David and Jonathan's story. So it would be unfair of me to leave you right here with Jonathan dying and not share how David responded to what happened to his friend. So David caught wind of the news of what had happened to Jonathan, his best friend. And he was utterly heartbroken. He was so heartbroken about Jonathan's death that I can imagine how it feels when you lose someone that's really close to you. It just feels like something just rips your heart out. And I imagine that's what David was feeling, because he had such a closeness to Jonathan. It doesn't mention any of his brothers or any family members that were so invested in David's life and cared so much about him, but Jonathan did. And in skip over to 2 Samuel, Pastor Mark. I really given Pastor Mark some work this morning. 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 23. He says, Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. So it's kind of just setting up and referencing the fact that Saul and Jonathan, they were fighting alongside each other when they were slaughtered. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. Next verse. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle, O Jonathan? Thou wast slain in thine high places. I am distressed for thee. my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful. And note what David says at the end of that verse. Passing the love of a woman. Now that's huge. Can you imagine a kind of brotherly love that exceeds the love that a wife would have for a husband? Just allow that to kind of sink a little. David was saying that the love that Jonathan had for him exceeded the love that any woman at all could ever have for him. David mourns the death of Jonathan, and he described the love of Jonathan as greater than that of any woman. David would eventually become king by the next chapter, and in an act of love and in Jonathan's honor, David would care for Jonathan's son. I think it's Mephibosheth. Just pull up that verse, Pastor Mark. 2 Samuel 9 and verse 11. As we bring our time to a close. So, team, just start drawing closer as we're going to just bring the curtains down this morning on our service. 2 Samuel 9 and verse 11, it says, And then said Ziba unto the king, according to all that my lord the king hath commanded his servant, so shall thy servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table as one of the king's sons. Such a beautiful imagery this morning as we bring our time to a close, and we just reflect on the lessons. We saw the love and humility that was expressed by Jonathan. We saw David's favor and his troubles. We saw Jonathan's support and sacrifice. And lastly, we saw David and Jonathan's farewell. As I close this morning, and we looked at the brother from another mother that David had, I cannot help but think about Jesus. And I would have done this message an injustice if I were to ever close it off and not reference how sweet and how overwhelming the love that Jesus has for us. It far exceeds the love of any woman as described by David, as he was describing Jonathan's love for him. That Jesus would leave the splendor of heaven and he would make himself lower than the angels. And he would allow himself to be mocked, to be scorned, to be beaten, to be spat upon by his own creation. To have a crown of thorns pressed against his brow. And I imagine the blood just running down his eyes, or down his face, down his cheek. All in an act of love for us who were still his enemies. It's one thing to die for someone that's your friend, but recognize the reality that Jesus died for you and me while we were still his enemies. And if that kind of love does not move something in you or kind of overwhelms you, I don't know, man, I don't know. Because I know what it feels like to experience the sacrificial love of someone who would be willing to give up their last to support you. And it doesn't matter if you're going to be called names or whatever, they're willing to stand by you. And that is what Jesus did for us. All of us this morning, just before we sing, can think back to a moment in our lives when we felt weak, when we felt burdened, we felt broken, we were hurt by people. People that said that they would always love and care for us. And we can all remember a time, especially believers this morning, when the love of God, it was no longer just reading John 3:16 and reading about God's love. It became real. And you felt that love for yourself. And the love of God just wraps you. And And it holds you and it supports you and it says that you are no longer my enemy. You are my child, you are my son. Man, if this story of love doesn't break your heart, come on up, Daniel, as we're going to sing. Jonathan was loyal to David until the end. Jesus took all our guilt and shame and he took it all the way to the grave. All in an act of faith. To say to the Father that although Luke was destined for hell to be separated from you, you can call him your child, your son, because of what happened. This morning we celebrate this hope. I want you to meditate on this song as we bring our time to a close this morning. As I sing.
Problems had me bound.
feel like, I've had moments when I feel like giving up, just walking away from it all. But when I think about all that God has done for me, and all that God has done for other people through my life, it would have been an injustice to the faith if I was to ever walk away. So I want to encourage somebody this morning. You may be on the verge, you may be this close to the edge of giving up. I want to remind you this morning that God is here for you. And He has brought you from so far. Just stay encouraged, just hold on. Just hold on. Team, I wanna redo that verse. I almost gave up. Just one more time. I was reading one time. You want to do this. Hallelujah. Don't give up this morning. Listen. But even before I do that, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to all that you have heard this morning. I know these are hard times for all of us, and you may be struggling in a different way that I'm struggling. But we're all struggling. And we all need hope, we all need some form of peace. There's a lot of turmoil, a lot of wars going on around us, and sometimes even inside us. I present to you the Prince of Peace this morning. I pray that you'll find peace, you'll find joy in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the chaos of your heart. And you make a decision about what you have heard this morning. Would you just bow your heads where you are, at home, wherever you're watching, as I pray for you. Father, you have spoken this morning as only you can. God, I pray that your word would have gone forth with such clarity that even the babe could understand. God, you don't want us to just be hearers of your word, you want us to be doers also. And as we have examined the model of friendship, of companionship that was shared between David and Jonathan, and it was not any kind of surface level or shallow kind of relationship or friendship. And God, we have so much of that even in our churches. Oh God, so many people, we worship together, we sing the songs together, and we don't even know each other's names. God, forgive us because we have sinned. God, I pray that you will help us as your people to seek after relationships of depth and meaning, God. Relationships that would count. That people would come to church and they don't even have to open their mouths to say that something is troubling me, that we'll be so closely knit together like David and Jonathan, that we can feel when something is wrong with sister so and so and brother so and so, and we can pray for each other and we can support each other. God, we are all broken before you. And as we bring our time to a close, we want to say thank you, God, for how you have been taking care of us, how you have been providing, how you have been protecting us. Thank you for your hand upon our lives and your favor that was given to David and the purpose that you want to birth from our lives. God, remind your people that you are on their side. And if God be for us, who can be against us? Remind your people that they are more than conquerors. May they walk out this week, dear God, in whatever activities they'll have to do, not as victims, but walking in that victor mentality, dear God, because you have overcome. And so we as your people can walk as overcomers. God, as your people will click off this stream this morning, God, I pray that it would not just be another service, another message that they would have listened to or have watched, but something would have happened in their hearts. And it would mark the beginning of a new journey for all of them. Thank you, God, for how you have spoken. Dismiss us with your blessings now, I pray. In Jesus' name. Amen. Hallelujah. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Man, so grateful to have been able to share that word with you. It was such an encouragement to me to dive into much deeper relationships, and I pray you will do the same. As you go off, as you click off the stream, and you probably go on to Amazon or wherever you want to go next, I pray that you go reminding yourself that to be a friend of God is such a beautiful thing. I pray that you will use that reality and seek to and you have a desire to make much more meaningful relationships with your spouse, with your children, and with your friends. I pray that as you go, that God will bless you and He will keep you and He will bless you continually. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.